good morning.
Good morning.
Rather than read you Bill Bolling's bio, I want to take a few moments to share with you a story of impact. Deep in my graduate studies at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies, I had several opportunities as a full-time student to get to know Bill and director of the Atlanta Community Food Bank, if only from afar. I attended a presentation or three he hosted on coalition building within Atlanta's nonprofit sector, and read a handful of op-eds Bill wrote about Georgians who were hungry. At every moment, whether discussing public policy or those with whom the food bank worked in service, Bill used stories to bring statistics alive and spoke with urgency and compassion. He was an outspoken advocate for both the responsibilities of civil society and people living without enough food. At a point when I was spending too much time interning for and reading about nonprofit leaders that were too afraid to advocate for progressive policy due to their fear of losing funders, Bill was a brilliant exception. He was unapologetic for his outspokenness and beautifully wove the duties of service provision and advocacy together. He made them inseparable. Bill greatly informed my view of the role of nonprofit leadership and helped me discern what type of mission I wanted to serve, and importantly, what type of leader I wanted to be. So Bill, I thank you for this lesson, and now I welcome you to this breakfast meeting. Thank you.
Wow, that's a nice introduction. I know many of you in the room, and I've tried to go to each one and tell you not to out me on stories you've heard before. But as I was trying to understand my assignment today, I really just said, come in and tell stories. So I guess that's what I'm doing. It's great to see so many people. Who knew 150 of you got together here at the Federation Tuesday morning? Sounds like a jobs program. I'm retired from the food bank, and they start attending meetings and find some place to be. I want to just say up front that many of you probably know I retired from being the leader of the food bank after a short 36-year stint. Thought it was time to move on. And as people have asked me how retirement is going, I'd say great, it didn't work out. I'm working on a lot of other things. One of the things that I'm doing and trying to be helpful, and I just want to acknowledge David Edson and Ann Curry were generous enough to offer me a space down at Cox Curry. Now, leaving the food bank where I'd always been and had a team around me, I really didn't know what I was going to do, where I would be, or kind of what my work would be. I found that over the last year and a half. But I'll have to say that being at Cox Curry, I've probably learned more in the last year and a half about development and kind of how the community works than I ever knew in my 36 years of raising money for a particular organization or a particular cause. And I just say that to say how much respect I have for those who have picked this part of the work, of working in development, of telling your story, promoting whatever it is that you have a passion for. So just up front, I want to thank you for that. I don't have a 3-point or a 10-point plan for you. I do have my own experiences. Some of them might still be relevant. Some of them aren't, because the community is changing, technology is changing, the needs of the community is changing, and certainly the narrative in our country about what the needs are and whose responsibility it is. So I would just say the things that I share from my own experience of building an organization around an idea, the things that worked and didn't work, and maybe particularly the things that didn't work you learn the most from. Use the ones that are helpful, and the other ones you just say, God, that old guy just really doesn't know what's going on today, and that may be true. So I want to kind of put that out front. Times are changing. Just saw on CNN this morning, and sent out to some of my colleagues, one of the top stories on CNN.com was Health and Human Services basically giving a speech yesterday in Washington saying that there was no proof that nutrition programs had any effect on educational outcomes. and you go, whoa, you know, I mean, just common sense would tell you if you eat, you might have better health and educational outcomes. But, you know, that's the environment we're in, and it's not a good or bad time, it is just the time that we're in. And a lot of that has to do with whose responsibility is, you know, for the things that we want in our life and in our community to make the community or the city or the region, the state, the country, the world that we want to live in. So that's part of what your responsibilities are, is to promote that, to try to get support for the cause that you're promoting. I can say that when I began back in the 70s, it's hard as you get older to say those things and use those dates. I was alive then, and actually, fourth grade, they put me in charge of the food bank. But, you know, I started out, you know, I'd gone in the small town, knew early age, I wasn't going to live there. Joined the Air Force when I was 17 instead of 4 years. A couple years in Vietnam, did a lot of growing up, and then came out to start college. Really undirected, but just knowing I didn't want to go to work. I should go to school, right? Had a GI Bill. But no, my family had ever gone to college, and it wasn't a big aspiration in our family. It wasn't something that was expected of me. I expected it of my children, and hopefully grandchildren, that this is part of the path, you know, to success. But for me, it was a path I chose, not with a great vision of what I would do. It was a path of, well, I'll go to school and try to figure it out. And you know, studied, got a business degree for lack of a better subject, and then I got a teaching degree, and then went on, came to Georgia, and went to school in psychology and counseling. You think, what has all that got to do with development and being a nonprofit leader? I would say that no matter what you studied in school or what your children may decide to go study, it's all healthy. Wouldn't you say? I mean, we can use all of our experiences in education for whatever we want to devote ourselves to. So when I came to Atlanta and had met my wife to be, and we've been married for 40 years now, we decided to live in a community. We really wanted to live out our values. We were down in Midtown, which is a rough area of town back then. I bought a house down on Myrtle Street for $30,000 and got hung my neck for taking it off his hands. And it just sold for $1.3 million. So you can see what a good business person I am. We sold it after 10 years and gave the money away. I don't know what we were thinking, but I mentioned kind of that background to say that I came into the work more as a calling. It wasn't a professional choice, or it'd be good to be doing this or doing that. It was, I wanted to honor my values, what I believed life was about. So we lived in an interfaith community, and homeless, mentally ill living with us, and we did that for 10 years. We had worship, and yoga, and meditation, and I was the leader of that community. So I learned a lot about managing dysfunction, a lot of dysfunctional people living with us back then, but also came to love those people. So I started at St. Luke's Episcopal Church just as a volunteer. And I would say my hair was longer than anybody in the room I see today. And I was living in this commune, the church said, but I was young. I was credentialed, and I had a whole community of young people that wanted to help me. So they kind of let me in the door, and within a few months I was the director, unpaid, start. But it really was a call, you know, to feed the hungry, really to be with people. So for me, and even I'll get to kind of the food bank, it never was around how many meals or how many pounds or, you know, all the numbers that we have to keep. It more for me was, I wanted to make things better. Simple as that. And that's, you know, it could be more complicated, but it was not for me. So at the end of being at the food bank, it was not, you know, I helped distribute 500 million pounds and did all this stuff. It was I faithful to my call? So one point I would say, not so much organizationally, but personally, is that no matter what stage of life you're in, you have to kind of keep coming back to that question of what resonates in my heart, what might be my call, or where do I want to devote myself? And then you've got to ask your question, how do I prepare for that? What am I willing to pay for what I believe? And then later in life, you have to ask the question, what am I willing to do to sustain that? I mean, you can't eat wings and drink beer every meal when you're like in your 20s. You get in your 30s and 40s and 50s, you have to start saying, I've got my lifestyle and how I live and who I associate with will really affect how successful I am in my work. So that's just kind of a personal piece of how I came into it. Now, the idea of a food bank, this was 1978. For those in the room, there was a time when there was no UPC codes. We didn't scan food and register. Go figure. But that was a time also when there was a lot of food waste. Well, actually, 40 years later, we're still in that time. About 30% of what we grow and package is unmarketable for one reason or another. So the idea is let's capture that and let's get it to hungry people. And because I came at it from a ministry perspective and out of a church, it wasn't I wanted to build a big logistics system, it's I wanted to get food close to where people were in a safe place so that relationships could develop. Change usually comes out of relationships. And it's not just relationships of us who have things help people without things, it's how this industry works, isn't it? One of the things you need to know as a development director working in a development department is pay attention to details. We're all in the relationship business. Things build on each other, so you build your social capital over time. I'm on fire with this idea of food bank. I mean, doesn't it make sense? Wasted food, hungry people, just get it to the folks. It seems simple to me. And having run a community kitchen where we were feeding hundreds of people, and I was seeing lives transform, homeless folks, because I thought, we can replicate this. And in fact, we have. We've got over 200 food banks, part of Feeding America Today. I was part of the original 10 people to start that. We're in 34 countries. So the concept was solid. But how you get there, and I know a number of you are working with organizations who are probably less than 10 years old, and you're trying to convince folks this really is something we need to support. So how you get there is really important. And I know for me, when I went over, back then it was Big Star and Alterman family owned Big Star, great Jewish family in town. When I went over there, and I'm just so excited, I just struck out. Just struck out. We don't give away food over here. We sell it. You can leave now. But I'll be back. And it took me about 4 tries. And what I had to figure out is I had to become a solution to a problem that we had not identified yet. So in the development business, you really have to know who you're asking from. I mean, even think when you write a proposal, whether it's one to government or a foundation or family or to volunteers to help you out, you really have to know a lot about them. You have to think who's going to read this proposal and what are their markers. And are they risk averse? Or are they working for somebody? Really you have to do your homework there. So they taught me this real quick because I couldn't get any food, so my idea was going nowhere. And what we had to figure out there was I can inventory everything you donate to me, right? And if I give you that, we can scan it now, so it's a lot easier. But we were the first food bank out of about 10 to say, we'll figure that out. My answer was, sure, I can do that. I didn't know how to do it, but sure, I can do it. Right? Isn't that our answer? I remember when I got 25 churches to say, we'll open your doors, we'll open our doors to feed the hungry if you'll give me the food, which I told them I had. Or a warehouse or a truck or nothing, I had an idea. Ideas are important, but you've got to start building it out. So I've made the point, you really have to know who's on the other end. And you have to do your homework on that, right? You have to become a solution, right? Figure out what their needs are, what their priorities are, and you're part of the solution for them. I just don't think, I mean, I know there's some giving of people that give out of guilt. I raised a lot of money out of suburbs on guilt back in the 80s and 90s. It works. It's not a long-term strategy, because we feel guilty about different things. If somebody comes along and says, you don't have to feel guilty about that anymore. But, so you use different methods, right? In the food bank, we figured out that if we could give them a tool to help them fulfill their goals to make money. I had no problem with that goal. You know, if I made money, maybe some of it would come to me. And very early on, the donor says, hey, Bill, if this works out, we're going to give you less food. Right? So you have to think about that. If it's working out for them, is it going to work out for you? And there's where you have to take the long view. Right? That, yeah, the goal is you waste less food. You know, maybe the prices will go down. Maybe your company will make more money. But what I believe over the long haul is if I become a partner in your business, then we're going to figure out another way for you to help. And I had to believe that, and they had to believe that I wasn't scamming them, that there wasn't something behind it. And in fact, that was true. So you can't always go in, I win and you lose. You know this. It's got to be a win-win. And they've got to figure out what their win is. You've got to figure out what yours is. Then, of course, and I'm just using my story as an example to make some of these points. Then you find out that, well, we could do that, but, gosh, we may get sued. Well, that's real, right? So we had to change the law. And it took a year and a half to do that. A person at St. Luke's Episcopal Church who had been a state legislator, Ham Loki, great guy, and we got that passed. And then we had to create incentives, so we worked for about 4 years with IRS and got them to change tax laws for the whole country. So when you're in the development business, you have to think, what would be the barriers for me getting to where I need to go? And sometimes it's legal. You know, sometimes it's a mental barrier. You know, sometimes it's we can't execute or we can't get where you need to go. There's a lot of different reasons. In our case, we created tax laws where you would get the cost of the product. If you throw it away, you write it off at cost. So you get to write that off. In our case, we changed laws where it was cost plus half the profit you would have made had you sold it. Whoa, right? Now, questions, who's inventorying it? How do we legitimize this? We had to figure all that out. But again, in this case, it may not translate to what your product is or you know, what you're doing development work is. But my point is you have to know that person out there. Both know the people you serve, know the people that you want to be in partnership with. You've also got to sustain over time. And I think sustaining over time, you know, I wrote an article probably 4 years ago now, seems like yesterday, and it was called Do Facts Count? Not so much anymore. Well, actually they do. Not so much in the political environment, but you've got to have facts to manage. You know, you've got to have facts to manage whether you're making progress. You've got to have the data. And this is where things have really changed in the development world. We did it all by hand, you know, 40 years ago. I can remember, and probably some people had this experience, when I got basically briefed that, Bill, we need some software to do this. We can't just have ledgers and spreadsheets. And we bought Cadillac. We bought the Razor's Edge. Right? You can do Salesforce. There's a lot of systems you can use today, and a lot more than in the beginning. But I bought that, and what happened? Nothing. You know, I'm 2 years into it. Where the hell's all this good stuff supposed to happen? And you know, what I didn't do is I didn't have the people to run the car. I bought a Ferrari. It wasn't just an old Ford. It was over, you know, I had one that would really work, but I did not have the staff trained and the right people to use that tool. So that's a really important point when you're in the development, is having the right tool for the job and being able to use it. Because the information you get out of it, when you go back, you need to track the folks that are donating to you, know who they are. keep a relationship with them. We're all in the relationship business. But nowadays, you do that with a lot of forms of technology. If you get that technology, you've got to have folks who can really use it, who can really use the tool. I learned the hard way on that. Did figure it out. And, great development department, but it took a minute. So you have to kind of be careful. Another thing that we found in development at the food bank is how you frame what it is that you're promoting, you're doing development is really important. So we were just talking about this earlier. You know, the framework for many years was there's waste, there's need, what's the question? Everybody deserves to eat, don't they? Well, I'm not going to ask people to raise their hands here, but I figure a lot of you would say, yeah, everybody deserves to eat. Good God, we're throwing it away. What's the question? Well, everybody doesn't agree with that. Now, there may be a lot of reasons people wouldn't agree, but there is a narrative that there's a certain part of our population of people that don't deserve our help because they don't help themselves. They got bad values, or they're bad parents, or they're lazy. You know, that fourth talking point about all the folks being in hammocks. Remember that one? I don't remember that fourth talking point. I even looked into the hammock business, thinking, hell, if they're all in hammocks, maybe I'll get into that. I couldn't get a good source, so I didn't go into that. But so the narrative around whatever it is, right, that you're working for, you've really got to understand how people see that. And just because we may have a certain value system of everybody deserves to eat, everybody doesn't believe that. So it's really important that you learn who's out there, what their needs are, that you're a partner, that you're a solution to them so that it's a win-win, not a win-lose. And then you've really got to learn a lot of different languages, don't you? Because when you're talking to business folks, you're measuring things a different way. Luckily, people come over to the food bank and realize what a brilliant business person I was, right? I took an idea, and now it's a $140 or $50 million company. My first warehouse wasn't as big as this room with no loading dock. So, you know, you took an idea and you took it to scale. That's good, and I did it because I surrounded myself with great people and embraced change and kept listening to the community. But for business folks, they want to know return on investment. Food bank, Teresa, what's our return on investment over there anymore? $7, $9 to $1? $7.28 is the number I used a year and a half ago. Hopefully it's getting better, but you know, that idea that an investment dollar in will get you a return, a life changed, or number of pounds out the door, and it gets harder for some of you who it's hard to measure that, right? We may be trying to change consciousness. How do you measure that? Or we're trying to change some health outcome that takes years to know the outcome of that particular that drug or that therapy. So it gets harder when you can't exactly measure, but it doesn't mean you still don't have to raise the support. So really important that if you're talking to the business community, you're talking business language. You're talking about return on investment. I used to go to groups and say that I was the best banker in town. Get a 7-to-1 match. No bank in town would give me $7 on your dollar. So they should invest in me. I'm not saying you should give me anything. I'm about people investing. That's really important that people feel like they understand what the return is. But if you're talking to the faith community, you would frame that differently, wouldn't you? It's not investment language, it's transformational language. If you'd asked me what my work was, it was not to get food out the door, it was the work of transformation. I want to transform lives, and food is the tool that we use. And then you work with the different faith groups. I remember we met for a year, sitting here in the Jewish Federation. We met for a year down at the Christian Council, 848 Peachtree. I still remember the address. And we had all the folks in the room and talk about this idea of the food bank. Really important what you name something, right? I even knew then name's going to be important. So it was Atlanta Community Food Bank. And the group had voted that we're going to call it the Christian Food Bank. And you go, there's a problem with that. Jews own the food, and we're going to get the food and take all the credit. I don't think that's going to work. So it really is, it's got to be a partnership. So one of our commitments right up front is to work across faith lines. Why? Because at the faith communities where the food is delivered in our model, or in our nonprofit, community-based organization, but it's awfully a faith community. And if you look, I had lived in an interfaith community for 10 years. I had studied all the different traditions. And I knew that if you went to Scripture, if you went to whatever the master teacher or prophet of that particular tradition, that there are basic values of every tradition. Feeding the hungry was one of them. So for us, we wanted to work with the faith community, but we needed to work across that community. If you come out to the hunger walk we had a few weeks ago, it was our, I think, 33rd or something like that. I mean, we did walks before they were cool. In fact, walks before we knew what to do with walks. First one we had, people showed up, and I didn't even have a route. We just started walking out. Didn't have a permit, didn't have any police. Just follow me up Charles Allen, and we're going to do this. But, that's how you start. And people gather around this idea. And yeah, you take some risk up front, and then you learn from it. So getting back to learning the different languages. It's not, and I tell young people this all the time, we do need to learn Chinese and Spanish, 2 other languages to be good for any of our children to know. But we also need to learn to talk to different communities and to understand what their goals are, what their fears are, what their stresses are, and how we can be in partnership. Now, another thing that I found out is that doing development work could not operate in a vacuum. So the point there is that in your organization, big or small, everybody's got to be on the development team. And I would dare say some of you in the room are working in organizations where you don't feel everybody's on board. I'm over here doing development. You guys really don't understand all that I have to do over here. So we worked really hard at the food bank to build a culture. It really does come back to culture and values of an organization. To build a culture where everybody felt like they were contributing toward that goal. Now, we could frame it, if we don't raise the money, you don't get paid. That's kind of a gross way to put it. But if you have a higher aspiration that we're all contributing, whether you're the truck driver, the warehouse person, or you're working in accounting or HR, whatever, that we all have a role, that really makes the most effective fundraising development department in an organization. Do you agree with me?
Yes.
It's not always easy to do. Again, you've got to find a way to reach people and for them to connect the dots so that you're not working in an organization in siloed departments, that everybody's on the development team, that you've got a set of values that you're reinforcing over and over and over again, that you're measuring what you're doing, however you measure that you've got to measure things that get counted, get done. That the community's got to perceive you as part of their community, right? So like in our model, we would centralize the acquisition. There's one phone call for a Walmart or General Foods or whoever it was. They didn't need to make 100 calls. They couldn't figure that out. We could handle that. But the key was not to get everybody to come to the food bank. The line would be from here to Macon every day, doing 100,000 meals a week. There's 75 million pounds just in Atlanta, and we have 8 food banks and over 2,800 organizations. So the model we have taken to scale, but it doesn't work automatically. You've got to just keep renewing. You've got to embrace change. You've got to bring young people around you because they're going to challenge your assumptions. You've really got to build a culture that values what you're doing. Let me stop. I don't know where we are. 20 minutes, 25 minutes into it. So you'll give me a signal that we're about done. Let me stop and just see. I can I can keep talking. Anybody got any comments, questions? Or make it relevant to you?
First of all, thank you. You're not only funny, but inspirational. Hard to balance, though. But I wanted to tell you that I think a lot of people in this room are not only development directors, but also executive directors. And how important it was for you to say, and how important it is for all of us to remember, everybody has to be on the development team. So I've been doing this for a while, and I can't tell you all, and some of you know, you'll interview with an executive director who says, I hate fundraising. I don't understand how that's going to work for us. Or I just wonder, like, how will that work? If you hate fundraising, then we all have to be a part of that message. And so I just want to underscore that, because coming from you to this group, it means a lot to us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kim, and I couldn't overemphasize that. And sometimes it's a process. You know, it may be because I tried so many different jobs in my life and failed at most of them before I finally found my calling. You know, they'll say if you don't ask, you don't know, right? But if I'm shy by nature. I'm very good in public, talk, so forth, but just by nature, if I was coming in a room and didn't know anybody, I'd go over to the corner. I wouldn't go to the middle. It's me, so. And I like to be liked. I don't like for people not to like me. I don't like to be turned down. I mean, that's not a good MO for a development director. On the other hand, I have a goal, and I'm willing to pay a price here to get there. So I had to learn some of those skills. Yeah, here's a point I've talked more organizationally today, but you know, the most successful people, and let's say in being an ED of a nonprofit or being a development director, working in the development department with aspirations, you know, to be a leader of other folks, is the key to your success is doing your interior work of knowing yourself, what your own. In fact, I framed my work around calling. That may not be comfortable language for everybody, but there is something about aligning who we are, our values, who we think we are, doing your interior work. I love that Howard Thurman quote of don't ask what the world needs, ask what brings you alive, and go do that. Because that's what the world needs, is for us to wake up and be alive. Now, in our householder stage of life, depending on how many children, that could go on for 20 to 80 years, you know. But in that householder stage of life, you do have to sacrifice. You don't get to do just the things that you want to do. Kind of like when you're young, you know, you can eat wings and drink beer, and that's okay, but you can't do that forever, right? That has to be a special occasion. So that's really a part of, you know, on a personal level of doing that interior work, of knowing what your own call is, of what your passion is, of where you want to make a difference. And there's no right or wrong answer to that. There's just your answer. And you also have to keep going back to the well. You have to kind of keep going and say, in this time, in this place, am I in the right situation? Am I doing what is nurturing my soul? I won't go too far down that path, but I would say this is really the core of being successful in whatever you choose to do. It's in alignment with your own values and who you are and what your calling is. Other thoughts or questions? Yes?
So you had talked about how, surprising, but still, not everyone believes that everyone deserves that food, for instance, when you go to that people. What have you found to be the most successful ways to help those folks understand why your cause was important?
Okay. Did everybody hear the question? Tracy asked, you know, if just the natural, everybody deserves to eat doesn't work, how do you bring people on board? I'd come back, I hit on it lightly, but I'll say a little bit more about how we frame things. So I don't know why I knew this, but just somehow I intuitively knew that even working, as the community minister in a church, that I need to figure out where the big table was, where the big decisions were made, where there was money or power to change policy. So I always invited myself to those tables. I wasn't always invited to the table, but I invited myself. And I conducted myself as a professional, but said, I need to be here. So back in the 80s, when Atlanta was much poorer and downtown wasn't the vibrant place it is, or Midtown wasn't the vibrant place it is today, I insisted being part of Central Atlanta Progress. That's kind of the super chamber of commerce. And there was one of the great leaders of this city, Dan Sweat, whose job it was to keep the streets clean and safe. They were trying to build a convention business, right? Be a good business environment. And my job was to take care of the homeless. And there were thousands of people out there. So it wouldn't look like Dan and I had that much in common. And we didn't. We often disagree. I've got arrested in front of my own church more than once, because I said all these people were my guests, and I've asked them to lay down in the churchyard. That didn't go over that well. But we did realize over time that we had something in common. And this is an important point. No matter, what your worldview is, and there's plenty of fears around the other. So, historically it's been black folks, but are Jews, or now it's Muslims and immigrants. There's always an other that we fear. They're the ones keeping us whatever it is. And one of the things we have to do is figure out, what do we have in common? So what Dan and I finally, probably in the mid to late 80s, we've been fighting for a long time. I remember us sitting down in his office one day, and we just decided that we needed to kind of reframe it. And what we decided is we both loved the city. And we both wanted the best city that we could have. And I wish Dan was alive today to see a lot of the things he did back then, which are paying off today. Most of the real work we don't see in our lifetime. We have to trust that we're building a foundation for the next generation. And Dan and I figured that out. I used to tell him, Dan, I'm not going away. Don't worry. I will keep coming back. He had to believe that, right? And as development directors, you get turned down. It's not like, I'm going somewhere else. It's like, no, let me listen, figure out how to do this better. You figure out how to find a language that'll touch you. So in framing the work, let me give you an example, Tracy. In framing the work, if you can't get everybody on board for we all deserve to eat, and you can't, then you try to think, what is another way I could reframe this question? So framing is very, very important. So if you ask a question that everybody says yes to, right, now we're in conversation, maybe a very high level. We haven't worked out much to what we disagree on, but Dan and I got to yes. We love the city. So if you ask the question, do we want better educational outcomes? Everybody wants that. I mean, all of a sudden, you're invited to the Chamber of Commerce. If you can help us with this, we can educate people the jobs we have. The economy's going to run better. We'll all have more money. You know how that works? That whole trickle-down thing that never trickles, but that idea. So if you ask, do we want better educational outcomes, we can talk about core curriculum, charter schools, or, a lot of things to talk about. Teacher training, whether the state take over your school, lots of things. But here's one thing that we don't have a lot of argument. If you don't eat, you don't learn. If you eat sugar for breakfast, you don't learn mid-morning. And, the head of HHS can have that press conference and say there's no proof. All you have to do is ask a teacher. Just ask a teacher. Because most teachers keep some food in their desk today because kids are coming in hungry. Well, you can argue about what meals to put at the school or, how we package it. But we do know that If we want better educational outcomes, one of the things we know is that nutrition is really important, access to food. Only 15 to 18% of the kids who get school breakfast, school lunch in the state get access to a summer meal. And that's just lack of political will. Because the Georgia Food Bank Association, we have, we know how to do that. What if you ask a different question? Do we want better health outcomes? Wow, you really get a arousing yes, we want better outcomes. Now, we can argue about Obamacare, Ryan care, Trump care, whether it's tax credits or making people do it. But at the end of the day, we know that if you don't have access to good food, if you eat really poorly when you're young, if you get diabetes when you're 8 years old, your pancreas doesn't get better. It's not something you grow out of. So just in the sense of better health outcomes, I say you don't have to like the people. It's just in your self-interest. So think about where you are. If you're an ED in a small nonprofit, and maybe it's one where everybody doesn't embrace what you're doing, or maybe doesn't understand what you're doing, or understand that the investment in what you're promoting answers those bigger questions. So very important how we frame what we do, how we talk about it, the idea that we use different languages. It's important to say that, if you're talking to business or government or working with the universities, the faith community, that they do have different ways of talking, they have different bottom lines. What you can't lose is your core values. You can compromise some on how we talk about it. Again, you have to know who you are and what you stand up for, what your organization stands up for, what you're willing to pay for that. Both individually and organizationally, what you're willing to stand for. But really important how you frame it, how the community understands it. Yes?
So, thank you again. You've talked about your calling. You've talked about knowing your values. You've talked about the work that you did to prepare the next.
I'll take you on the road with me. You didn't have to go in.
I'm curious to know, how did you know when it was time to pivot and to sort of take this baby that you've spent nearly 40 years, following and investing in and building an amazing team and having a tremendous impact? When did you know it was time to step away?
I hear that question. I know it's time to leave, huh? Well, one, if you're replaced for 36 years, somebody will tell you, hell, get the hell out of here. They didn't exactly tell me, but it's a good question. And probably a chapter in the book I'll never write. But it's a really important question because we are, myself being kind of a baby boomer, I think some of us stayed too long. Not in the sense that we weren't effective, not in the sense that we weren't getting the things done, is just getting out of the way for the next leader. So one of the things that I had to do, this will all be a long answer. One of the things I had to do when I thought it's time is I had to look, and is my organization ready for me to lead? I'd say it wasn't. I was this iconic founder, director, known all over the world. What are we going to do without Bill? Well, you really have to do the work first with your board and your team for them to come to the point that we're going to be fine without Bill. So we had to work on values. We had to work on our culture. We had to work on the sense that I had 150 staff, and we spent 2 years really working that they owned the food bank. And they were in charge of the next CEO being successful. And if they loved the food bank, they were going to work for that person. And they would be different than me. Now, the question of how did I know? There was a couple of questions that kind of came up for me. I would say the last 3 or 4 years at the food bank, as I started talking to the board, we should have a plan, right? I mean, you just get of an age where you could just not be there one day, right? So we should have a plan. We didn't have one. Nobody on the board wants to be on the board when that question comes up. Yeah, it's about time for me to get off now. It's been a good run. So one, you've got to really create a board that's willing to accept that responsibility. And, you know, the board realizing and kind of surveying realized that, wow, we're going to have to pay the next person a lot more money than we've been paying Bill. Well, I own that. I never asked for more, right? I always wanted more for my senior team. But the organization had to get ready for that. It wasn't here or there when I was getting paid. It was how are you going to get the talent that you're going to need. So that's a conversation. I asked myself, I have spent my life building social capital. Everybody familiar with that term, social capital? You know, being a banker like I am, I use terms like that. And the capital that I built, and what we call social capital, is the capital of bonding, you know, building your community, and I've done that. I've built trust. I've sustained over time. I had a big network. And bridging. I had spent a career doing that. I bridged across faith lines, class lines, political lines. You know, you could not box me in to be one thing. Now, I'd say when you choose that path, it's more lonely. You know, you don't quite belong, but you belong with yourself. You belong to what you believe and surround yourself. So, when I thought at this point, I could keep doing the food bank. At the top of my game, I was the only one left from the folks who started food banking. So I was a famous guy when we go to meetings and so forth. But for me, coming back to what I was called to do, is how am I going to spend my capital? Right? So in that sense of, I have not a lot of power in the traditional sense, but I got a tremendous amount of influence, big network. And is there a different way I can use that? So when you become, hard to say, but you know, because you don't feel like it in your mind, but when you kind of become the elder, when you become the person who's been through these stages, then you have to say, what can I give back? Could I have a greater impact in mentoring, in teaching, in convening? I can convene in ways that a lot of people in town can't do. I can get a diversity of folks to come together and facilitate it. And I love that work. I love running a team, and you know, one of the things I'll tell you is I miss my team. I miss my people. It's just the hardest thing I've ever, because I've always worked with teams. And the agreement, which was a good agreement, is I would not come back in metal. And I've honored that. You know, but that's hard. You're leaving people, some of them work 20 plus years, 25 years. Not that I couldn't see them socially, but you know, we're not on the same team anymore. So that's the price. But you have to pay these different prices at different stages of your life, right? It's just like being a householder stage. Your primary responsibility is your family. You know, it's not you anymore. It's your family. So in that sense of becoming an elder, you ask a different question. How can I be most influential? How can I help the next generation? And you know, the big fee I got paid today to come out here at 7:30 in the morning and talk to you guys. That's how I'm making my money now, you know. This is what I do now. You know, I just come and tell stories, but hopefully there's some, you know, out of the stories there's some things that you might take home with you. So that question about is there a different role? And can I spend my capital in a different way? And can I influence the way we're thinking? And a very important time right now. You know, as development directors and the executive directors, we're in a very sensitive time. I would say it's the great dis-ease of America, is that we don't believe. And we've been taught that, particularly not to trust government. You know, I just think it's ironic that people run for institutions that they don't believe in, talk down, and then they never leave. I mean, they just, it's like, isn't that funny? So one of the things we have to do is build trust back into institutions. That's part of my job today, is to work across all the distinctions and differences and to try to identify what we have in common. I'm working on a housing campaign, $100 million for affordable housing, which is about 5% of what we need, but it's a beginning. And we've just announced Tuesday that we've got the first 100 million identified. Now the real work begins. Where we're going to spend it, who's in control, but that's the stage you have to go through. And it wasn't, I've got a bunch of housing advocates over here, we need more affordable housing. It was, what's the city that we want to live in? The campaign is called City for All. And we believe that a diverse city of all ages, of all incomes, of all colors and sizes and religions, a diverse city is a more effective city. It's a place that we want to live. And if that's not where you want to live, you can move out to the place that's more homogeneous. But that's the city we're creating. So how you frame it's really important. Figuring out our role is really important. Yes?
So Bill, when can we expect the book?
Well, I'd have to slow down, wouldn't it? I don't know. Marion Wright Edelman, you probably have heard of, one of my great mentors. I remember she's written a number of books, but one of her first books that she read, I think she has 5 children, boys, as I remember. I remember in the foreword of the book, she said, I realize I need to write this book for my children. So in a cynical world, and in a world where everybody's self-publishing, and we're all got computers on us, let me just commend you that nobody pulled yours out. Just a few of you did, but nobody pulled it out, did your email while I'm talking. We have this stuff coming at us all the time. So one more book, I'm not sure, helped. In the sense of not losing the stories, that would be important. So whether it's a book or videos or am I just telling stories and then you retelling them, those stories are really important. And I think we do both learn from basic principles and values and also have to take that and put it in a new context. So it's a new time. One of the things that I'm doing is surrounding myself with young people. I'm mentoring a number of young nonprofits, directors in town. And I would say, just like in this room, the women are running the world, so men just, most of the people I'm mentoring are young ladies, and they are so smart, and they're so engaged, and they're so passionate, and they so need the wisdom of how do you sustain something over time. So if that's the part I can play that fulfills, as fulfilling as getting another $75 million, there's people, and Kyle Wade's the director now, there's people that can run a company just as well, or probably much better than me. So these are important questions to think about your own stages of life, because your role may change. How you go about your business may change. Embracing, technology or building different coalitions. What shouldn't change are your core values. What shouldn't change is being in touch with what you're passionate about. One of the things that we know, one of the things I found in my life, is that my happiness, and that is something that we strive for in life, my happiness is less defined by my position or power or money or how many houses I have, much more defined having a sense of purpose in who I surround myself with. So coming today, nice to have a speaker today, but what you're really doing, you're showing up here in the morning, you're doing networking, you're seeing folks that you can't get on the phone anymore, can't get an appointment with, you're announcing, we're looking for this person. We should never take that for granted. It's one of the things that sets us apart. If you've traveled in the world, there's no place that has, a social community that has what we have in this country, that we can gather around our self-interests. We can either gather with people that we may not share an interest with, but still feel safe that we can do that. And that's a basic right that we have that we shouldn't take for granted. So coming together today, whatever nuggets you take from the speech, much more important is that you're solidifying, nurturing, sustaining the community that you're in. That really is the place it's from. How are we on time?
Well, a little over.
A little over, there you go.